heard you watched JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I mean, what's really bizarre is the fact you get no bitches. And I hear you love anime girls, but you can't talk to women.
Your feelings for her are not real. They are real to me!
So it's been fun these last several months, only covering topics that no one on the planet Earth asked for, but I figured this channel could take a break from its own ritual suicide to discuss something that actually has been requested a good bit, and that is the DLC expansion for Bioshock 2, Minerva's Den. If you haven't seen my video on the base game, I'll give you the SparkNotes version real quick. I like it a lot, and I've always felt like it was criticized in a disingenuous way by a lot of people when it came out. Interestingly, the reception of Minerva's Den was nothing like that. It is pretty much unanimously adored by everyone who's touched it. There is so much good shit that this DLC does, as well as some minor things it changes from the base game that I'm less a fan of, but overall I love it just like everyone else. There are a few areas where this DLC gets a little overpraised in my view, however, like relative to how the base game was treated. I mean, people whined about the strangest fucking things in Bioshock 2. Again, I have a 23-minute schizo post on that topic if you're curious. But in Minerva's Den, people trip over themselves to hype up some really insignificant ass changes. Like one gentleman YouTuber I heard talk about how brilliant it is that there are no weapon upgrade stations in Minerva's Den, and you just sort of stumble upon upgraded versions of your weapons as you go, because weapon upgrade stations are like video gamey and don't make sense. And I guess that's totally an opinion a person can have, nothing wrong with that. But just throwing the upgrades on the fucking floor isn't exactly a 160 IQ design choice either. You know what I mean? And there are a couple more standout examples of weird, desperate praise. Maybe you've noticed some of them yourself if this isn't your first Minerva's Den video. And I feel emphatically that people who throat Minerva's Den while dismissing Bioshock 2 are pure copium addicts who refuse to engage with the base game honestly. But I think I got that out of my system, and we can just move on and do normal ass reviewing now.
When I fight homeless people, I do the comedy moves. I'm like, oh, like that. I don't even care if it's inefficient. I just want to cause humiliation.
Mechanically, Minerva's Den is obviously near identical to the base game. They threw in a new weapon and a plasmid, and made a couple minor adjustments to how some existing plasmids and tonics can function. But at a glance and from second to second, everything feels about the same. The most monumental change to the game world, in my view, is how filthy fucking rich you are the entire time. In Bioshock 2, you are hurting for money and certain supplies for so much of the game's runtime, and I always felt like that kept you on your toes and brought some real nuance to the atom collecting dilemma. But the DLC is a full-stop power fantasy. At any given time, you're almost guaranteed to have either more resources than you could possibly need for any encounter, or enough money to go buy said resources. And because the devs were probably assuming that anyone who would play Minerva's Den would have gotten through the base game, I understand why they made it that way. Some story DLCs try to be as consistent with the base game as possible, but I feel like the majority either spring for a harder experience or a power fantasy experience. And I think both are totally valid. I think Minerva's Den is a little less intense and you have to strategize a little less, but there's no denying that it is fun to just fucking obliterate everything as a Big Daddy. Another key difference from the base game is the lack of smart verticality in level design. And now feels like a really great time to mention that the team which built Minerva's Den was basically a fucking skeleton crew compared to the team responsible for the base game, which makes it all the more impressive. With that said, while Minerva's Den has some awesome set pieces, the cool multi-floor combat arenas with interesting cover that I praised in the base game are mostly not around in this new Wing of Rapture. I mean, there are rooms with multiple floors and sightlines between them, but these weren't really put together with frenetic combat in mind in the same way. It's mostly just normal balconies. Chucking a gravity well down on the peons below you and watching them ragdoll around is a blast though, so maybe that's the intent. Speaking of gravity well, that's one of the two major additions to the Bioshock arsenal that we get with the expansion. You toss it, it makes a tiny little black hole, sucks like a pro, and that's that. Upgraded, it can be laid as a trap, and upgraded again, it becomes poisonous for some crazy fucking reason. The other addition is the ion laser. It's got 3 ammo types, energy, fire, and burst, and I find the visual of switching between them to be very satisfying to look at.
And you're probably wondering, what is autism?
I do have to say that I, totally subjectively, don't really like how it feels to use. It looks cool, it just doesn't feel very weighty, or like you have to move or strategize, or even aim very well when firing it. It is an obscenely powerful weapon that will carry you through tougher encounters, to the point that it would be a serious handicap to not use it at times. And to clarify quickly, I think it's a cool weapon and a very solid addition to the game that you'll probably love. It just doesn't mesh super well with my personal schizoid playstyle. Moving on, you'll enjoy testing these new weapons against such exciting flavors of drug addict as the Fire Brutes, the Chili Houdinis, and the Rocket Robots. Brutes showed up a fair bit in the base game, but they are all over Minerva's Den, and all of them have total fire resistance. I'm not sure why this happened, just be aware and act accordingly. The Chili Houdinis are like normal Houdinis, save for the fact that they can't be frozen and will pelt you with snowballs. And the rocket and laser robots are annoying as fuck when they're up against you, but they make up for it by also being annoying as fuck when they're on your team, by constantly body blocking you in doorways and hurting you with splash damage. Moving on to, let's call it objective pacing and design, it is better in Minerva's Den than it is in any other piece of Bioshock content, in my opinion. When you enter a new region, Homeboy comes over the radio and explains to you what the general goal is, and then you're left to figure things out from there. When you get pretty close to finding what you're looking for, then the screen arrow pops up to give you a little guidance. If you find yourself confused or lost and need some more direct assistance, you can go into the menu and receive more detailed instructions at any time, but the game doesn't immediately assume that the player is a fucking lobotomite who can't read wall signs and needs to be guided by an arrow through every part of the game. And this approach obviously isn't only applied in this DLC, but it is the most consistent here and feels the most intentional and natural. Now, as far as any sort of environmental puzzles, Minerva's Den keeps things very, very simple. You might need to find the hole in the wall to shoot a hacking dart through, or find the switch that turns something on in the other room, and they really wanted to hype up gravity well, so there's a few instances where you use it to destroy control panels and open doors, and that really is the depth of it. Now, puzzles are not meant to be a selling point or focus in any Bioshock game, so this is not a criticism, it's just another thing that contributes to the DLC's overall streamlined and, I think, in a weird way, powerful feeling. Just like your combat efficiency is so much greater here, it also feels like Rapture itself is able to put up less resistance to you.
What was the plan then, genius? Huh?
I don't know.
You don't know. You know why you don't know? Because you don't think. That's why. You don't think! You never figured out how to think!
And now here we are at the actual selling point for the DLC in most people's eyes. And just a fair warning, I'm probably about to spoil a lot of it. So if you still haven't played this and want to experience it all mostly blind, make sure you swing by the comment section to call me your favorite slur, and I'll see you next month. Alright, now that those fucking losers are gone, Minerva's Den has a super solid self-contained story that introduces one of the most interesting characters in the entire franchise, closes out the story of fan favorite Bridget Tenenbaum, makes a very neat expansion to the Rapture lore in the form of the Thinker, and even features an antagonist. The antagonist kind of fucking sucks, to be honest, so let's just get him out of the way. It's a pretty commonly accepted idea in writing, at least in my limited experience, that the antagonist is actually the most important part of the story, because their resistance is what actually defines the arc of the protagonist and the other characters. And there is a massive selection of media where brilliant villains have been able to strongly make that case. But I'm very happy that it's not always true. Charles Milton Porter is, in the eyes of many people, myself included, the strongest and most empathetic protagonist that the Bioshock series has ever crafted, while the DLC's main antagonist, Reed Wall, is by far the weakest amongst his peers. Everything that makes Charles interesting has jack fucking shit to do with his relation to Wall. The grief and growth we hear Charles go through is completely disconnected from his schizophrenic coworker who's off scheming in the corner. Andrew Ryan shows up in like 2 audio logs, and as a tiny secondary antagonist just in the lore, he completely overshadows Wall, because he's such a good fucking character. Wall is more in line with those 3 minor antagonists from the base game, and he's 100% less interesting than even the worst of those 3. And really, a better villain would be cool, but clearly the story didn't need it to thrive. I only put emphasis on it because cultural Bioshock 2 hatred demands that I do. So many people rag on Sophia Lamb for not matching up to Andrew Ryan. Now where are the people to rag on this non-contributing fucking schizo? The Bioshock fanbase has a habit of being a little selective with their criticism, that's all I'm saying. On a side note, Wald's voice actor does a really good job. It's the same guy that voices Joshua Graham from New Vegas' Honest Hearts DLC.
We can't expect God to do all the work.
And Wall sounds nothing like Graham, just FYI, he's some kind of dirty Russian. But the manic tone and the delivery goes a very long way in squeezing some entertainment value out of a very one-dimensional character. Back to the more positive things now. If you didn't catch me spoiling the ending earlier, I'm gonna re-spoil it right now. You start the game as a big daddy named Sigma, being guided by one Charles Milton Porter on a quest to reach a supercomputer and future reading device known as the Thinker. But the big twist is that you are Charles, and the Charles that's guiding you is actually the Thinker itself, trying to help get the both of you out of Rapture with the sideline assistance of Tenenbaum, because the Thinker is your creation. Andrew Ryan and Reed Wall betrayed Charles to keep the Thinker for themselves, but before they could drag him away to be made a Big Daddy, Charles activated a protocol within the Thinker, urging it to make its way out of Rapture by whatever means necessary. It just so happens that the best means to do so was through you. And all of that is really cool. It's a fun twist. It's not like super surprising because so few new characters are brought into the lore, and you kind of know that Sigma has to be one of them, so you can sort of piece things together, but the whole picture does come together really nicely. But that's not even the good part of the story. The good part is the unrelenting fucking tragedy that is Charles Milton Porter's life. A young genius in the field of mathematics, Charles wed the beautiful Pearl when each was in their early 20s. It being the late 30s at that time, and with tensions rising dramatically in Europe, Charles was recruited by Alan Turing to join an elite code-breaking team in London to assist the war efforts. This station would cost Charles his young love, however, as the Nazi Blitz of London would turn their apartment to rubble and ash. This left Charles in an understandably vulnerable state and brewed in him a strong dislike for world governments and their incessant need for war. When Andrew Ryan learned of his genius and his loss, he offered Charles a lucrative position in Rapture's high society where he could continue his computing work for Rapture. Charles would accept and spend years alongside Reed Wall constructing the Thinker. Eventually, Charles gets the idea that he can turn the Thinker into Pearl by feeding it audio recordings of her and coding it to reflect her mannerisms and personality. There are several audio logs around the map that just consist of Charles going through that process, and they are so fucking well done. I mean, sad and almost kind of creepy, and you can hear the desperation and mourning in Charles's voice the entire time. It's very well done. Anyhow, trying to turn Rapture's only supercomputer into a weird sexbot replacement wife thing understandably begins to create division between Charles and his associates. Before long, they're scheming ways to be rid of him. Charles eventually realizes that the Thinker will never actually be Pearl, and that this has been both a waste of his time and a disgrace to her memory. Shortly after this realization, Andrew Ryan decides to be rid of him, so Charles activates the Thinker's aforementioned escape protocol, and the rest of the story unfolds as you know. Outside of the gripping and fairly unique personal storyline, I think Minerva's Den also brings a lot of value to the table in how it offers a totally fresh perspective on the kinds of people who might have been drawn to Rapture. It's no secret that Andrew Ryan's objectivist rhetoric could be a little extreme and short-sighted, but to a literal genius with near limitless potential, racked with grief and robbed of the only thing he cared about by the nations of the world and their wars, it must have been incredibly refreshing to hear. I feel like, with Tenenbaum as a sort of exception, the denizens of Rapture, even before they were all tweetered out, are presented as egomaniacal sociopaths who came to Rapture because it's a place for egomaniacal sociopaths. But Charles shows us that Andrew Ryan's message can appeal to the empathetic and the considerate just as easily. It just requires a little betrayal from the surface world. And I think that's pretty much all I had to say this time. I know you guys had to wait way longer for this shitpost than usual. I do wish I could be more consistent for you, but at the end of the day, this is a hobby that isn't always easy to carve out time for. I have no intention of jumping ship though, I promise. Any questions, comments, concerns, or media recommendations, please leave in the comment section below so I can see what the boys are thirsting for, and I'll talk to you guys later.